He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Hi, and welcome to Eating Fried Chicken in the Shower bonus episode. I'm joined, as always, by clinical psychologist Sarb Johal.
Kia ora, James. Good to see you again.
My man. I gotta talk to you about this term, toxic masculinity, which has really come to the fore the past few years. And I feel like there's a little bit of confusion as a general term. I think some people, they hear toxic masculinity and they go, yes, that's the term I was looking for. I completely understand. And then other people hear it and they're like, oh, I can't even eat a steak anymore. And it's, I can't eat red meat. I can't drink a beer. I can't watch rugby. And that's not actually what people mean when they say toxic masculinity, is it?
No, not at all. And I think that kind of reaction is a common misunderstanding about what we mean about toxic masculinity. And it's not that men are inherently evil in everything that they do, but it is that much of what we consider traditional masculinity causes serious harm to people of all gender identities, and that includes men too. And so this is not about masculinity having to disappear or go away, but we absolutely need to address those toxic elements. And then we can start to think about, well, what does positive masculinity look like? What is a stronger, healthier, and more positive sense of masculinity, which makes it not only safer, but also a much more expansive experience of what it is to be masculine too.
It's like a beer, really, isn't it, mate? No, a good beer will have, and I say this to you as an alcoholic, a good beer will have like a light amount of hops in it. A strong beer, quite a few hops, but you can have too many hops. And toxic masculinity is kind of like masculinity with just way too much hops and yeast. It's not good for anyone. It's just going to make you gassy.
It's very one tone, right? It's like, this is it. This is the rules, and this is how you be a man. And the rules as to how to be a man have been one-dimensional for far too long. Yeah, we've got a broader and a more diverse set of kind of behaviors that, men feel more free to engage in now. They don't have to hide these bits of themselves away so that they only show them perhaps to their closest loved ones. And God forbid that might be another man who sees that part of you showing that more vulnerable or tender side. But I think that times are changing, but I think, that emotional behavioral set that we can develop and express is really important in terms of embracing a much more of a diverse, positive, masculine set of behaviors.
I often think we don't appreciate that language changes too. So when people, that be a man, you got to be it, like that actually comes from back in the day quite a bit. And what they really meant was how to be an adult. Didn't they? That's what that sentence meant. Sometimes you got to be a man. Sometimes they really meant sometimes you've got to act like an adult. But we've sort of, as the times moved on, it's like you've got to be the manliest man. Is what that seems to have become.
Yeah, not showing weakness, right? Presenting as tough, and you're expecting other men and boys to be as tough, if not tougher than you. And you have this kind of like race of being the toughest person in town, and it's clipped language, it's being stoic, it's hardening up. All of these things that we know are actually really destructive towards mental health and well-being, not just for men, but for everybody in men's circles too.
What kind of detrimental effects are we talking here, Sal?
Well, just think about the range of opportunities and experiences that we're closing ourselves off to, for one. But the second one is, by being clipped and rejecting all this other behavior all around you, and by aggressively rejecting that with violence as well at times, because people are not fitting into the stereotype of what is permissible around manly behavior, then this is a really destructive path. And I think that, I hope times are changing, but thinking about a fuller range of emotions and behaviors that don't adhere to these male stereotypes. For example, when I started working with children, and this was only in like 2000 to 2003 when I was training, I remember even my friends then were looking at me askance, like, man, why are you a man who wants to work with children? What's that about? And it was looked at, as something that was really odd and unusual, and perhaps signaled something odd and unusual about me. Whereas actually what I was doing was being encouraged in my clinical training to really get in touch with, my nurturing side, and that's where and how I express that.
Do you think that one of the key things is to be more emotionally vulnerable? Like, do we start that journey just with our close circle? Because I think a lot of guys now, especially the guys I grew up with, some of them, they see what's happening. They kind of think it might be good, but they don't know how to take those first steps.
Yeah, and it's really hard when you have grown up in an environment where perhaps you don't even necessarily have the emotional vocabulary to identify what's going on with you internally, right? So often boys, young men grow up in environments where there's two experiences. One's anger, the other one's hunger. And you vary between the two.
I still do.
I have that. Hopefully I have a few more other experiences too. But a lot of men don't necessarily know what's going on. They know it feels unusual, but they don't necessarily have the language to express what's going on with them. So we have a generational gap, perhaps, in terms of the skill sets that men have in terms of being able to identify that. So being understanding around conversations around how is it that they can really start to name their own experience, and literature is really good for that. Reading's good for that. Films are really good for that. TV's good for that. When we see role models, when we see other men having these internal experiences and that being interpreted and storied for us in a way that they are able to name it, and then the behaviors that follow from that, then gives us a much more diverse range and set of behaviors that we can see about what's possible in terms of how to be a man.
It's this sounds very fancy, but learning to cry.
Yeah, I mean, experiencing that wide range of emotions: sadness, fear, shame, kindness,
just
tenderness.
letting out. Like I hear what you're saying, and it's that feeling uncomfortable. And I think a lot of when you're a kid and you feel like that, you cry. You don't even have to think about it. That's your natural response. And I feel like as you get older, well, for a certain generation, crying is bad, and so you feel bad, and you got to have that emotional response of crying, and then the conditioning kicks in.
Yeah,
and you go, oh, I'm not meant to cry, and then you just end up kind of almost. I've seen men shake, like violently shake, because their brain's going cry and their body's going no, and it's like is learning to cry a really important thing?
Absolutely. It's socially sanctioned that you're able to cry in some circumstances and absolutely not in others. Whereas actually physiologically, crying actually only signifies moving from one emotional state to another.
Wow.
Which is why sometimes we can start crying and we don't really know why, but it's actually signaling that some internal state has shifted within us. Now, women have, because of how it's been socially accepted, and they have more freedom to be able to express that emotional signal change, and behaviorally it comes out through crying, whereas men don't. Or I sometimes have tears in my eyes, but I'm struggling to not let them come out. But at the most silly things, a song will come up on the radio and suddenly I'm moved to tears. And I may not have heard it for years, but it suddenly triggered a memory for me, which was a very tender memory, or it's something that I was very happy about, or something I was at an event, and it's not necessarily a bad emotion. It's just signaling to me that I'm in a different place. My emotions are suddenly in a different place. And the more we can get in touch with that and see that tears are actually just a signal that something's changed within, rather than any kind of weakness. I think if we have a better understanding of that, then we'd be far more willing to let it go, because often the tears come and they're there for like literally 2 or 3 seconds and they're gone again.
Is it the same with love as well, in terms of with your close male friends? I'm thinking of this particular example, just being conscious to vocalize that you love them, and acknowledging that the bond between you is our love. And is there something is there something psychologically empowering about doing that?
I'm a big advocate of expressing tenderness, love, in many different ways. And, and men may express that in different ways. Traditionally, it might be, a slap on the back, or just being able to spend time playing pool together and having a beer or whatever. But as our emotional vocabularies, as permission is granted within friendship circles around how it is that you might express that through modeling, or what it is that you see in modern TV or whatever it is that you're exposed to, then those behaviors start to get adopted and they're not seen as so strange. So I think that, people find ways of expressing love and companionship and appreciation in ways that feel comfortable for them. There's a little bit of trying out, I think, that's going on at the moment. That can feel a little bit uncomfortable at times. But taking, small steps in being able to express your love and appreciation for your friends, your fellow man in small ways, I think is, only a good thing.
Clinical psychologist Sarb Johal, thank you very much.
Yeah, James, love you, mate.
Love you, bro.